I caught up with the former Union Minister, Senior Congress leader Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and I began by asking him whether the Congress was not beginning to feel that they had let off the possibility of going in for the low-hanging fruit when they themselves were in power. Because for the longest time, when this issue of denial of visa to Gujarat's Chief Minister Narendra Modi came up, it was almost as if the Congress was feeling only too happy to let Mr. Modi be embarrassed by an external agency.
No, but in fact, the UPA government at that point didn't take a position on the matter because Mr. Modi was applying for a personal trip. And as you know, the US had actually taken the position that on a personal trip they were not going to give him a visa. Had he wanted to go as part of an official delegation or gone in his official capacity, I'm sure the government would have extended all assistance to him. But the question never arose in that form. Today, what has happened with the invitation, of course, is something that we perfectly support. I mean, as an Indian, I would not want anyone, any foreign country, to insult my Prime Minister. So the question of a visa doesn't arise, and the issue is a totally different one today. I don't think it's fair to hang that on the UPA government's head.
No, but you see, Dr. Tharoor, you say it's not fair to blame the UPA for that, but the truth is that there are many who thought that you were not batting for him. You were not, for instance, say when the entire controversy broke out about whether he could be doing a video link to Wharton or not, what was the response of the UPA? The UPA was simply playing a silent role, sir.
Well, let me ask you to recall that as far as I myself am concerned, I spoke up against the one decision that occurred when I was around, which was this Wharton students disinviting Mr. Modi's video conference with him, and I said that was wrong and ungracious. Even though I had been crossing swords with Mr. Modi on other issues, I felt that was the wrong thing to do. But I was not in an official position to do anything else about it. As far as the UPA government is concerned, as I said, I don't think the UPA government interferes in the foreign travel of any Indian dignitary if it's a personal trip. When the trip was intended to be for official purposes, the Chief Minister would come through the Government of India, and of course the Government of India would have helped. I can't imagine a situation where, let us say, an opposition Chief Minister coming to the UPA government, to the MEA, and saying, will you facilitate my visa to country X or Y, doesn't get the full assistance that we would give. That's normal. But a personal trip is a different matter, and that was all, as far as we are aware, that Mr. Modi was seeking to do at that time.
But Dr. Tharoor, I must ask you this question. You know, as someone who's been a former union minister, a former diplomat, how do you look at this surprise element which Mr. Modi seems to be championing as far as his foreign policy initiatives are concerned? Look at what he did on the date, for instance, of his swearing in. He suddenly went out, took everyone off guard, invited the Sri Lankan president, ignored the kind of concerns which were being expressed by the Tamil Nadu chief minister, went ahead, invited the Pakistani prime minister, ignored the kind of reservation which had earlier been expressed by sections of his own party. Do you believe this surprise element which is coming from Mr. Modi is going to be his biggest USP, even if you were to look at, say, for instance, this whole Indo-American initiative now, which seems to be mushrooming under Mr. Modi's leadership?
Well, look, first on the broader question, I think that Mr. Modi's overwhelming majority, with the BJP getting a majority on its own, certainly liberates him from both his party's previous positions and from being hostage to allies, whether within the NDA or amongst the state governments. That certainly gives him the freedom to do the kinds of things he did, inviting people despite the objections of certain state chief ministers and other state political parties allied to him. And that is something that we should recognize as a significant change. We have not been in India in a position to do that since 1989. So that's been a very important development. Secondly, as far as the surprise element is concerned, surprise in and of itself is a very short-lasting benefit. Surprise gives you a good headline. It may add to the intensity of feeling good about a particular initiative, but it has to be followed by the nuts and bolts of hard work, of diplomacy, of following through.
Dr. Tharoor, it's interesting, you know, that you've been talking about Mr. Modi in a manner which suggests that you are almost changing your position. I mean, may I quote to you, for instance, what you've said in Huffington Post, where you are gone to the extent of describing Narendra Modi as an avatar of progress and development. What's happening, Dr. Tharoor?
I think the problem with our media is it tends to misrepresent what it reads very hastily or doesn't read at all. Maybe it's reading paraphrases of my article. What I said was that Mr. Modi is trying to rebrand himself and remake himself from a hate figure into an avatar of modernity and progress. And obviously that is not my judgment, but my judgment of what Mr. Modi is trying to do. And I believe we've seen evidence of that, because from the 16th of May onwards, we've heard nothing but positive, accommodative, inclusive language of reconciliation. We have not heard Hindutva being mentioned. We've not heard divisive rhetoric. We have seen a man who says he's there to work for the welfare of all Indians. And my position, very simply, as an individual Congress MP on the opposition benches, is that it would be churlish not to acknowledge this.
And finally, Dr. Tharoor, are you a little worried that the BJP, which has support of 282 Lok Sabha MPs, majority government on its own, are you worried that the BJP may actually not be interested in building the kind of, say, national broad-based consensus which used to be the hallmark, in a sense, and many thought was a hurdle with Manmohan Singh as well, that he had to reach out to different political parties before undertaking any foreign policy initiative, whether it was with Pakistan or it was anywhere else? Are you worried that the BJP may actually not just be bothered about what your position is, sir?
Well, even in the days when the Congress had an even larger majority than the BJP has today, we took the position that political differences stop at the water's edge, stop at the borders, that we do not have a party foreign policy, we have an Indian foreign policy. Which is why, for example, at the height of Mr. Vajpayee's opposition to the government, he was always invited to be part of the delegation to the UN General Assembly. That is the spirit in which we have conducted ourselves when we were in government, and we would expect the BJP to bear that in mind as well, that political differences should not come in the way of the way in which India presents itself to the outside world. Mr. Narendra Modi, as our Prime Minister, is the custodian of that standing that India has in the world. And that is a very major responsibility. If he conducts himself as that responsibility implies, it means definitely taking into account popular sentiment. If he were to go massively against what we believe is the right thing, I assure you the Congress will oppose, and it's not just the 44 of us in Parliament. We, the Congress party, is a party that is present in every village, every street, every home in this country, and our struggle will be a national struggle if we feel national interests are being betrayed.
All right.